Hello there, Meg Riley here in beautiful Minneapolis, welcoming you to another hour on The VUU. Let's start by having our regulars say hello, and where are you? How is it?
Hi, I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford. I am here in hot Austin, Texas, and where I am just madly envious of all of my colleagues who are making plans to rush to courthouses and do weddings.
Hi, I'm Aisha House. And I'm in Seattle, Washington, talking over Hank.
It doesn't happen often. It doesn't happen often. Hey, and I'm Hank Purse, and I'm speaking to you from Boston, Massachusetts, and where the UUA was just written up in an article on, like, changes are clear, new open concept buildings, and it has a little description and pictures of introverted cells.
You gotta quit waving that and hold it still for a minute. Just hold it still for a minute.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Do you want me to read it out loud? No, I'm just showing this.
It's a picture of the new office.
Yeah,
that's a picture of the employee lounge or something, right?
Exactly, and they talk about those silly those dividers that we said it felt like looked like Connect Four, like giant Connect Fours. They talk about those and how how cool they are. But I'm sure I will I'm sure I will find a link and send it to you all so we can have it up and go look. It's the UUA.
Well, that is really cool.
Remember how quiet we had to be in there?
Yeah, it's very. You kind of have to whisper. There are these little seating areas put out. But yeah, it'd be interesting to actually sit there and talk. You'd feel like you're interrupting people. But people seem to love it. People seem to love it there. My staff, the CLF staff who's there, just loves it. So, and they have good Wi-Fi, so who can argue with that? Behind the chalice there today, we have Bob LaValle, who is our tech guy. You can tweet at #TheVUU. You can ask questions in the question and answer function on the YouTube station, and you can just participate in this conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about marriage equality, and mostly today we're going to talk about voting rights. Still hoping to be joined by Patrice Curtis from Washington, D.C., who has been working with our two guests today, Reverends Jay Leach and Robin Tanner from the Charlotte UU congregation and the Piedmont area UU congregation, who have been doing great stuff on voting rights. But today they're a little on edge. Why don't you tell us what's going on today there in North Carolina, Jay and Robin?
Well, so we're waiting any minute now, actually, for a ruling from a judge in the state of North Carolina who will at long last remove the dark specter of Amendment 1 from our Constitution, thereby freeing us up to engage in marriage equality in the state of North Carolina.
Woo. That is so.
What's happened? Hello.
There we go.
Meg was so overwhelmed that she blurred out on us.
Meg was so powerful. She screwed up the whole. She broke the internet. She just bandwidth. She just kind of wiped it out.
It's Google. It doesn't want us to talk about this. It keeps muting me. No, I was saying we had one of those horrible ballot initiatives here, as did people in California and other places, and it is. I mean, we defeated it. We're the first of the 31 states who'd had them to defeat it. Hooray. But it's such an awful thing to go through that, and so I can only imagine how it feels today to turn that 180 degrees around. Amazingly, knock wood, so far there hasn't been any horrific backlash to these decisions. Maybe people, I don't know. But anyway, I was going to say that yesterday, just being a smart aleck, I posted on Facebook the following. I said I was going to write a poem this morning celebrating marriage equality, but I couldn't think of anything to rhyme with heteronormative. And so you know, like 125 people got involved in this conversation, and darned if Rebecca Parker didn't write a pretty good poem using the word heteronormative. So I thought I would share it with us this morning.
Let me just say, what else is she doing with her time now, right? But to sit around and to write poetry, you know.
Well, she's living in Virginia, so maybe she's getting, well, no, I guess they don't have to get remarried. They're just married already in Virginia, I think, from being married elsewhere. But so, yeah, she's obviously one of the affected people on this, and yes, has time to write poems using the word heteronormative. So here's her poem. Hats off, Rebecca Parker, for using the word heteronormative in a poem. And may I just say before I read it, some people seem to believe that I was and I was just being a total smartass, you know, and so I got a lot of tips on if I ever do want, and I recommended that Kia Hartwood could take all of the feedback and make a country western song about marriage equality, because there were so many suggestions about how to rhyme. But here's Rebecca's poem. Heteronormative is
Meg,
just performative. Yes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
No, I was just going to point out that it's just so rare for you to be a smartass that it just threw everyone off.
I know. People just didn't know. They were like, that couldn't be what she's doing.
Right.
Good point. Well put. So here's Rebecca's poem. Heteronormative is just performative, staging its play every day. But queer folk with cool rhymes have upstaged in prime time, top billing, now thrilling, the ones who are willing to play it an alternate way. Marriage equality, queering theology make love the new queen of the day. Love alters our matings and changes the ratings. Now normal is out of the way. Hats off to Rebecca Parker. So I'm going to ask her to, you know, put the next stanza using head patriarchy and see what she can do with that. But yeah, pretty good. So who's talked to somebody this week who has gotten married or married someone, or other states that the states where it already hit? I talked to Annette Marquis, and Jean Pupke, you'll remember, has been going year after year in Virginia trying to marry people, and she actually got to do it this week. So pretty exciting for them.
Yay. I saw that one of our colleagues, the Reverend Gretchen Haley, who I believe is now in Colorado, she and her wife were able to go down and get Colorado married.
And how about that Linda?
Yeah, I was just going to say Linda Olson Peoples was on TV marrying people.
I opened my Tumblr, and there she was as part of the initial screen when you pull it up. It was her performing a wedding, and I was like, that's awesome. It was really cool.
She was in a above the fold color photograph front page of the Charlotte Observer.
Yeah, she was on the.
Give us the basic B-roll.
Yeah, she made the evening news, I think, just about everywhere. So it was exciting. Had a fan moment.
Well, my church, I believe, is now gathering and ordering cowbells, because we have faith that someday this will come. I had said something kind of in an offhand remark about I wish we had a church bell so that when marriage equality does get to Texas, we could, ring that. But in lieu of that, I'll be outside the church, marching up and down, ringing a cowbell. And now apparently this has caught on, and people are saying, yes, cowbells for marriage equality.
I nearly slept in my vestments last night on the advice of Lisa Bobby Kemper, but I don't have a wrinkle-free robe, so unfortunately I had to keep it in the car.
That's funny because my clerical robes actually have footy pajamas sewn inside of them.
That's brilliant, Hank. I'm jealous.
I had to pay, but they're Geneva. It's Geneva footy pajamas,
Right.
It is exciting when it happens, and have folks in your congregation, do you have plans of going down to like City Hall where you are and being there to celebrate with folks?
We're actually planning, Jay and I are planning to officiate within the sanctuaries of our congregations, and we just sent out a press release to that effect, inviting members of the community so that we can take time to sit down, get to know folks, and then craft a service that reflects their relationship. So I've already booked our sanctuary over the next few weeks to be open, and our assistant minister, Justin Martin, is on board. So we're all kind of just in a holding
Oh, that's
pattern.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of a different thing with this. There have been times, like Utah being one example, where they felt like they had a very narrow window of time, and so it was, run down to the courthouse and just get as many weddings done as possible. And with this, it's, the window is being open and it's not going to be closed.
Mm-hmm. We organized.
We did a.
Oh, go ahead, Meg.
Oh, when marriage equality came here last summer at First Universalist, and many of the churches in town, but First Universalist had a day when everybody who'd already been married kind of got recommitted, because there's something, there's no ceremony if you're already married somewhere else, but now it's legal. So there was kind of everybody stand up who already was married and let's bless you. And then that same day they had chapels all over the church, and I think 11 couples got married in the space of about 3 hours. It was really fun. It was just a huge, the big gay wedding. It was just, it's a real celebration.
The other thing Robin has helped organize here in Charlotte is we are now prepared to do an interfaith celebration service on the day that the announcement comes down. So we're actually thinking we may be doing a service tonight, and it will involve how many of our colleagues, Robin? 8 or so of our colleagues
it involves,
here in town?
Yeah, we have 8 of our colleagues, and then we have an additional 25 clergy representing different faith communities who will be present that I've heard from.
That is fabulous.
Congratulations, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's nothing shy of a scheduling miracle that everyone
news.
has agreed to. Yeah.
Well, everybody wants a good photo op. That's it too,
Well, and it's good to celebrate together for as long as we've struggled together here in North Carolina.
No, it's true.
We've done this as an interfaith partnership all along, unlike some more of our conservative brothers and sisters.
Well, it was like that. It was like that for us here in Massachusetts too. On the day when they finally started issuing licenses, people at the church I was serving, we all went down to our local city hall, and we had little bubbles and cards and flowers we were giving out to people who just were going in to get their licenses, and I have to say we got people, started coming to our church because of that too. But it was a great day, and we were the only church group down there, and I went a couple of towns over, and there were certainly some UCC colleagues who were there, but we were, it was us. It was just us and the UCC who were at that time able to sanction to perform same-sex marriages, and so it definitely felt strange, kind of being like the only ones out there, and it's amazing to hear like that you have the possibility of having 25 clergy from different denominations all ready to spring into action. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I never thought it would be. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
Go ahead, Ron.
I never thought. I was thinking last night as I put the twins to bed that I never thought it would be this quick in North Carolina. I mean, in other states, yes, but I never thought we'd see a marriage equality quite this quickly. And I didn't even realize the script I had in my head that I had prepared to tell my children, explaining why we had a state of inequality. And so now it's baffling that and delightful that I'll have to explain to them that, yes, people really did believe those things, and that was the law before, because they won't know that world.
Wow, that's amazing.
The other thing I was going to say about the service that we're planning is it is kind of sword in the plowshare, because we'll meet at a Lutheran congregation where we met just before the Amendment 1 vote for an interfaith service to call attention to that. And we met under the specter of every reason to believe that Amendment 1 was going to be voted in. into our Constitution. So we go back to this place where we were just 2.5 years ago, with a lot of energy that night, a lot of commitment to continue in the fight, but also under the specter of the fact that we were probably in a losing battle. So there's something deeply satisfying about literally going back to the same congregation and being able to celebrate tonight, and 2.5 years later.
Yeah, it's really astonishing, I think, what's happened. And, I'm just thinking, Hank, since 2004 in Massachusetts, all the denominations that have turned around. The Lutherans, the Episcopalians, the Presbyterians. We're still waiting for the Methodists, and I know a lot of people are working with the Methodists, but I feel like this is a revolution that Unitarian Universalists have been every step of the way, as have other people. I mean, I think of North Carolina back in the 90s when I was doing interfaith organizing, when I was the GLBT director, and Jimmy Creech, just this fabulous North Carolina preacher, was just out ahead of the wave so far. And I'm trying to remember what even denomination it was, maybe Baptist, whatever it was, he'd been kicked out of it. I think it was Methodist. He'd been kicked out of it. A straight ally who was just out there doing this amazing organizing. And North Carolina has always been the center of some really amazing equality organizing in the face of so much anti-equality. So, yeah, it's really sweet. I'm celebrating with you. I don't know what it's like to have lived through losing one of those initiatives, but just living through having one of them waged against my family was so awful. So the idea of coming full circle, that is really healing. I love that. And the Lutherans here were fabulous. They're a lot of the reason that we did not lose ours, is that the bishop was out there, and I mean, it's just, again, this revolution in mainline Protestantism. We're waiting for it to catch up with the Catholics, but the Vatican last night here, they're having these rosaries on the family, and there was one in St. Paul last night. And I'm really curious what Francis, if anything, might do about family issues. He's not stepped out anywhere on them yet, but he's certainly downed the hateful stuff. But we still have a really, really homophobic bishop here, so there's a lot of prayerful hoping for change among the Catholics that I know.
It looks like in South Carolina, though, they had issued licenses. I'm just getting a report now that they've halted those licenses, and the South Carolina Supreme Court is going to be reviewing them. So,
well, now, if anybody can help me with this, Justice Kennedy did not overturn a stay this morning from Idaho, right, in the Ninth Circuit. So there's some finagling to go on, but people don't seem to think it's going to be any more than, they're talking weeks, not years in the delay. So,
right. And what do you all think of this thing of these governors who are saying, I mean, to me, this is just like shades of the 50s. These governors are saying, I don't care what the federal government says. It's not going to happen in my state.
Well, I was talking just this morning with a guy, and there had been a quote, and I actually think the source of this quote was from a South Carolina progressive, which is actually not a complete oxymoron, though an unlikely combination. And his comment was, you have to remember, we fired on Fort Sumter. We have a long history of disregard for federal rulings. So, they're going to make this as miserable and torturous as possible. What Robin's referring to is there were a couple of settings in South Carolina where they broke ranks and started issuing marriage licenses yesterday. The interesting thing was, in South Carolina, there's a 24-hour waiting period before you can get married. And so the state immediately calls on the Supreme Court to rule within the 24 hours. Now, exactly how mean-spirited do you have to be to try to make sure we can get a ruling, because, by God, there are 12 people right now who hold a license, and that just can't be. So as it turns out, I think the Supreme Court did not rule in time on those particular cases. And so, as I understand, the scandalous reality is there's some married same-sex couples in South Carolina. So we may have to fire on them in some way.
Aisha, why don't you say your funny comments? Go on.
Well, what occurred to me when you said that after getting a marriage license you have to wait 24 hours, that's not true for buying a gun. So you can certainly have the capacity to kill someone immediately, but marrying someone you love is an issue. But I did want to say something about the Catholic Church. There was a funny story well, I don't think NPR thought it was funny, but what struck me as funny when they were reporting on the Cardinals, or this big gathering, is the family circle talk that you were talking about. The most controversial issue is giving communion to folks who are divorced, and it just struck me as so, like, that's the most controversial thing, and apparently cardinals and the Catholic clergy feel very strongly about it.
Well, I think it keeps people out of churches, so a lot of people. So I can imagine that they do feel strongly about it one way or another. Yeah, it's these are always interesting times. Always interesting times. What I've been thinking about is a number of these states that now have marriage equality don't have other protective, so they don't have job protection, housing protection. So you could legally get married and then, like the premise of that movie right now that's out, which I haven't seen, and then get fired for having done so. So it's just going to be, it continues to be a really interesting, complicated, evolving story, but some major movement this week, and so interesting that major movement looks like not hearing a case. Just
right. When I first saw that headline, about how the Supremes were not going to hear it, my instinctive reaction was, oh no, and then to like 30 seconds later go, wait, no, this is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
But some equality advocates are saying it's not, and they were disappointed that they wanted the Supreme Court to rule once and for all. And I've heard some folks say it was a cop-out. I don't think so, but I'm not a legal scholar either, so.
Well, apparently the notorious Ruth Bader Ginsburg this summer said something about that, and she talked about how I guess her opinion is that Roe v. Wade, with the way that it happened too fast, and that's what's still causing the problems, and that if they could give some time for this to go state by state, that would be better, which I guess if you have a long view, that makes some sense. I'm sitting here in a state with no marriage equality. Now, they did just move, our appeal is going to the Fifth Circuit, which gives me absolutely no feeling of comfort, because the Fifth Circuit last week is the one that said, yep, Texas, it's fine to go ahead and close all these abortion clinics. And so for the entire state of Texas, we're going to have 7. And they're all located in affluent areas in major cities. So the fact that that court is going to be hearing our appeal, and I know that there are some people who are looking at that and going, that's a good thing, because then that will get appealed to the Supreme Court. And I get that. I just selfishly wish it could be someone else's state and not mine. I'm just, it's too long. It's too long.
I want to ask a question. I want to hear from you as a group of Unitarian Universalist religious leaders. Back to this thing about, us and the UCC were the only game in town for welcoming every family back in the day, and now it's really broadened.
And metropolitan community.
Right. In fairness, right. But just a few folks. And so, what does it mean for our identity as a denomination when we're not the only place not one of the very few places that welcomes every family?
Well, I think this used to be one of our identifiers because it was so different. I think now one of our growing edges is welcoming interfaith and multi-faith families, and which is, I think, more and more what America looks like as well. But I was going to say, in the beginning, because I was in the Washington office when the Hawaii case came through, the gay rights groups wouldn't go to these meetings about marriage equality. The only people at the meetings on marriage equality were the ACLU, People for the American Way, the Reformed Jews, and the UUs. That was it. And it, you know, we would say things to each other like, we're on the right side of history, but it felt thin and pathetic, you know. And the gay rights groups said, no, don't do that. First, employment discrimination. In fact, Hillary Goodridge, the UUA employee who's Goodridge v. Massachusetts, describes being flown to Washington, D.C., sat down by the heads of the national organizations and told, don't do this. You're going to take the whole movement back. This is a big mistake. And so I love the fact that we're so well grounded in this. And that even before Hawaii, people had been, you know, you hear people like Nicholas Cardell marrying people in the 50s, you know, in Syracuse. I mean, these stories of just such, and I know those stories you can find in other denominations too. I've talked to other people, but I think we can be so proud of our history, and I hope somebody's writing it, because we've been such leaders in every state and locality and nationally, and what a great thing to have that now we're one of many who are welcoming. You know, it's hard to be one bit sorry about that.
Yeah. No, to be absolutely honest, I do remember like when I found out that some same-sex couples were attending my friend's church, or an Episcopal church, and like in the back of my head I thought, no, they're ours. Like, what are you doing, man? They're ours.
Well, and I think,
like, oh wait, oh yeah, you know.
I think Bob, you know, points to a bigger question, and that is, what do we do when simply being the church of none of the above is no longer enough? And I think that, you know, that's where we are now. It can no longer simply be, well, I couldn't fit in any other church, so I'm going to go to the UUs. We have to get better about articulating what it is.
Wait, why? What? We can't say that anymore? I missed that. No. Okay.
Well, and I think
the thing I wanted to say in terms of the unique claim, you know, having transferred my ordination into this movement, I was at an American Baptist congregation in New Orleans in the late 80s that ordained an openly lesbian woman. Now, as we know, there were a lot of Unitarian Universalist congregations that wouldn't have done that in the late 80s. So I guess I feel a little need to expand our understanding of history to recognize we've had allies all along, and I appreciate Meg pointing up the Reformed Jews, you know, who have, you know, been there a long time with us on this. I mean, I'm not disputing our leadership role. I mean, this is clearly a place where we've shown leadership, but I do think, I don't want to discount the colleagues we've had.
No,
and I guess
yeah.
One thing I was going to say is when, you know, when Bob broke in and said he had a burning question for Unitarian Universalist leaders, I was sort of relieved he wasn't going to ask if we would serve communion to divorced people. I mean, that, you know, that would stir it up, but.
Well, and I think some of this is reflective, right, like of our terminal uniqueness too.
Yes.
Like that we need to be the special ones who do fill in or the only ones who do in the history of, in order to be a viable religious voice in the 21st century. And I just don't think that's true. I think we have a broader tradition as religious progressives that is desperately needed in the now, regardless of our particular history on this issue. I mean, I think that's a piece of it.
Right.
And the other thing is, like you said, Meg, you know, marriage equality isn't the promised land on this issue. And we need to remember there's 26 other states out there, including North Carolina, where you can still be fired.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, Jay, thanks for lifting up your congregation. I mean, that Jimmy Creech, who I named, there have been absolutely heroic people. I mean, you know, in 1984, UU's backed up clergy performing services of union for same-sex couples. Thousands of clergy without that kind of support from their denominations have done it, have been defrocked for it, have really suffered for it. So I don't at all mean to say Unitarian Universalists uniquely were courageous. It's that denominationally, we and the UCC and the Reformed Jews for a long time were the only one with a clear go-ahead. So a lot of my colleagues were either going against their denomination or they were, doing weird tap dances to not cross boundaries. I remember when when Bush introduced the federal marriage amendment, the Presbyterians, the head of the Presbyterian office, great ally, but the Presbyterians then weren't ordaining openly gay Presbyterians, but they didn't support the marriage amendment, but they didn't support marriage. So she had to really carefully craft this message that wouldn't get her fired, basically, that was in keeping with their statements. So she could stand there and say, we don't want this amendment, but she couldn't say because all people should get married, and so that was not her individually, that was her denominationally. And that I feel like it was always the joke in the interfaith groups that for UUs, this was our easy go-to issue for solidarity and feel good. You want it to get hard, talk about economic justice, racism, some of those issues that some of the other denominations are just miles ahead of us on. And so, I certainly don't mean to lift up that we were morally superior, but it sure was a relief to have that backup. I'll say that. Well, Patrice is nowhere to be seen, and we were kind of thinking she was going to lead this conversation because she just led a delegation down to be with you guys, but we really want to hear about all of the voting rights work and your service with Dr. Barber and everything that's going on there. But why don't you start with why it's important to do the voting rights work in North Carolina this year? Why don't both of you speak to that?
You want to go, Robin, or you want to go?
Sure, that sounds good.
That was an either-or question.
Go ahead.
Okay. In trying to tell this story, the place I usually start is to say that about 15 years ago, North Carolina was in the bottom 20% of voter turnout in the country. So in the intervening years, there were a number of things done that showed remarkable progress, so that suddenly North Carolina was in the top 15% of voter turnout. We had same-day registration. We had an extensive early voting period. We did Sunday voting. We had pre-registered voting for 16 and 17-year-olds in high schools. We had a provision where if you cast a ballot outside of your precinct, it was a provisional ballot, but after reviewing and to assure that you were a registered voter, your votes would count. So all of that activity dramatically increased voter turnout in North Carolina, which you would think would be a good thing. The problem for some extremists in the state was, as it turns out, unfortunately, the wrong people started voting. So to the shock of these extremists in 2008, North Carolina narrowly votes for Obama for president. This sent shockwaves through the extremists in North Carolina, including a guy named Art Pope. And by the way, I've told this story is all of the rest of you unfortunate souls in the rest of the country have the misfortune of having to share the Koch brothers, right? So you only get so much influence from each of the Koch brothers because they're two Koch brothers in 49 states. We have our own personal Koch brother. His name's Art Pope, and he's focused entirely on North Carolina. He has he's extremely wealthy. He got his money from selling. Oh, I started to say something. Selling cheap goods, let's say, in these sub Walmart discount stores that he very intentionally places in communities of color. Often they're the only store around. And he has enormous wealth. And so he sort of single-handedly took it upon himself to reverse the horrible specter of people actually showing up to vote. So in the course of 6 years, he was able, through huge campaign donations, to restructure our state legislature. So once they have a supermajority in our House and in our Senate, and they have a Republican governor, the first time in over 100 years in North Carolina where they have the trifecta, suddenly they can just run amok. And they basically took the ball that was on the 50-yard line. North Carolina is a very purple state. And they tried to run it backward as quickly as they could. And I must say, they've done a damn fine job of it. So they passed what's been called a monster voter suppression act. It's the most regressive voter suppression act in the country right now. And Joanna, sadly, the Supreme Court just ruled on our on the last parts of our the voter suppression, and the courts here had last week suspended they were going to allow for same-day voting, and they were going to allow for the out-of-precinct voting to count. And the Supreme Court just took the state side, and that will now be reenacted. So all of what they wanted in terms of voter suppression is now in place. So what we know is the only way now, though we'll continue to fight the voter suppression legislation, the only thing we can do now is out-register and out-turnout voters. So that's what we did, aided by Patrice's group from All Souls in Washington. They sent 26 folks here to Charlotte, and they partnered with the Piedmont congregation where Robin's minister, and the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte where I'm minister. And so we started on a Friday evening with a kind of get acquainted time and a worship time, and then started early on Saturday morning with voter registration training, and went out into the community for the day in pairs and triads all throughout Charlotte, and then came back together at our congregation that evening. Got a lot of registrations, got a lot of voter promise cards, which are people who were already registered but who promised to turn out for a midterm election. We're getting ready in a couple of weeks to get our groups back together and do a last-minute voter turnout effort, partnership between Piedmont and the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. So I don't know what you want to add to that, Robin, but it was exciting for us.
It was exciting. It was, I think, two things at least for our people. One was to have support coming in, to have a voice of someone outside of the state of North Carolina saying, we are watching and we understand the importance of this, that this isn't just about North Carolina. It's about a state-by-state attempt to suppress the vote, North Carolina being really the first state where we're seeing that tested on the ground. But the second thing I think that was important to it was that we did it as Unitarian Universalists, understanding that we have a very different way of understanding the world and seeing the world, and that is that we come from a place of trusting people. So why wouldn't we want as many people as possible to be able to be engaged in voicing their opinion and how they ought to be governed and how their state should be run, which is quite different from the extremist voices that we have heard on this, and the extremist voices of faith who are coming out and clearly have a different view of human nature, have a different view of our world being a place. I was just on a panel discussion with one of those clergy persons in our community saying, this is a world filled with sin, and the righteous people can't trust others, and just being divisive again and raising this conversation. The other thing I would point to is that Reverend Dr. Barber places this in the historical context of saying there was the first Reconstruction, the second, and he understands this to be that we are now in the third Reconstruction, and this backlash you can trace historically over time. So I think that's important to understand that we've been here before, sadly. It has a slightly different face in the 21st century, but the argument and the worldview is the same.
Last week we had Doug Mooter, a blogger who wrote an article about the Tea Party being a logical extension of the Confederate Party, and said some pretty provocative things. One of the things that he said that really I've thought about all week is that Obama's legitimacy is being challenged in part because he's black, but in part because white men voted for McCain, and white men think that they're the ones who get to decide things, and particular white men do, not white men on this panel, but you know, so that somebody's illegitimate if they didn't authorize it. And I'd never really kind of seen it in such a particular way, but I hear what you're saying being a very logical extension of what he was saying last week.
Well, I think part of what Robin's pointing up, and Barber does a brilliant sort of political analysis of, he knows North Carolina history like nobody I've ever talked to. And I think a lot of people don't realize that in the 1860s, 1870s, there was a complete transformation politically in North Carolina. And there was huge participation from the African American community and a lot of African American elected leaders. So this backlash comes against this in the 1880s, 1890s, and then into the early part of the 20th century with the creation of the Klan and other activities clearly intended as a backlash to African Americans having political power. And that's so Barber locates what's going on in some ways, I think, Meg, to your point directly, as this reaction to the election of Obama and the kind of what that sort of awakens within this extremist community. That said, I mean, I think it's probably time for Hank and me to admit on this panel that we talked before and we sort of had made the decision about all of this for the rest of you. So well, we shift the agenda since Bob, we do in fact want to control things as long as we can. Right, Hank? Back me up on this.
Yes, it's true. You know, we are when people talk about the man, it's the two of us. That's who they talk about.
Oh no, it's definitely you. But I'm happy to be your lieutenant in this one conversation.
The rest of us will now be muting and defer to your wisdom.
Thank you. We'll appreciate that.
That's good.
Well,
I'm
then
living
mansplain this for the rest of you.
Moving on from the white man power party, I'm curious what your experience has been with doing the voter registration. My 18-year-old
as a white
son,
man, I'd like to. Oh.
My 18-year-old son this summer worked on voter registration, and you know, with all the idealism of youth, it was a shock to him because they would go into economically poor neighborhoods and try to register people, and you know, so much of the reaction that he got was, why? You know, the government doesn't do anything for me, doesn't help me. Why should I vote? And I was curious, what kind of, you know, what was the attitude you were seeing?
Well, I've done voter registration before in other places, and so I went into this a little cautious, knowing that it could be a really defeating experience, especially just folks not even answering doors. If you get them, then saying why are you here? But I have to say, one of the beautiful gifts that the extremists in North Carolina have handed us is we now have really a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious coalition. And on the ground in communities, my experience is a lot of barriers that kept us apart are simply broken down out of the fact that we're in this together and we have a common goal and a common vision and frankly a common enemy at this point. And so, we found, at least I found in the doors I knocked on, a lot of people said, oh, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much. I'm voting. I'm excited to get out there. And thank you for handing information out. We've got to get the word out. We've got to turn this around. That was disproportionately what I found in those that I talked to.
I think so. And I think also, to your point, Joanne, the change in voting here has been so dramatic that in 2008 and in 2012, African Americans outvoted Anglos by percentage, right? So, we have had a politically activated population in North Carolina. So actually the challenge now, because there's so many people engaged in voter registration, the challenge now is to find folks who aren't registered.
I'm curious, can I jump in with a question? Are there any Muslim leaders working with you all? Because you've only mentioned other Christian denominations.
In the coalition with the Moral Monday Coalition?
Yes. And the North Carolina coalition that you're working on, or whatever coalition.
Yeah, so that's under the leadership of the NAACP and Reverend Dr. Barber. And there is a very broad coalition, and there have been any number of Muslim leaders who have stood with us in Raleigh. So yeah, what he has created is remarkable. And I think part of the backlash we're experiencing is, when you see, environmentalists and women's rights activists and teachers and union people and immigrants' rights people standing with Christians and Jews and Unitarians and Muslims, and it's a powerful sight unless you don't want to see that, in which case it's really unnerving. And so but to answer your question specifically, there have been Muslim leaders standing with us. And I think part of what he's been able to do for us is that none of us are getting everything we want. So there's, just before the march in Raleigh, I spoke to a group of Unitarian Universalists, and I said, if you want to be the language police tomorrow, it's going to be a really long day. I mean, there's no question that at some point Barber is going to claim we are out here because God told us to be out here. Now, my deep love of poetry enables me to understand that perfectly. But if you want to be, a member of the language police, you might as well not even go out there. And so there actually has been a backlash from a very small group of humanists in North Carolina who say we can't do Moral Monday because we don't like Barber's God language. But amazingly, I think most people here have recognized the only way we can go up against the kind of the kind of extremists that we're having to go up against is together. And he has created what he calls fusion politics in an amazing way.
Well, and he's unforgiving in that claim. Each and every Moral Monday, he reminds us it's not about you. So if you come with one particular issue, it's not about your particular issue. It's about this movement. And he uses that language, which is so familiar to us Unitarian Universalists of movement.
I'm curious. I'm curious. He preached at the Charlotte Church on Sunday morning. After all that, how did that impact the congregation? What do you think? I've only watched him on YouTube, and he's amazing. I feel like you're making history there.
I was meeting with a group from the congregation last night, and this is one of the reactions has been I've had every group that I've met with since he was here, I've had to apologize. Because, as it turns out, I didn't realize this, and they've been incredibly generous. They did not call me on the fact that these puny little sermons that I've been preaching that rarely, if ever, go over 20 minutes. And it turns out they've been incredibly patient while I've been preaching these puny little sermons, not explaining to me that a real sermon is between, and I kid you not, in our first service, 49 minutes. And in our second service, a little over an hour. And in the community gathering in the afternoon, it was about an hour and 10 minutes that he spoke, hardly drawing a breath in between sentences. So, one of the lessons we need to learn is that we've been cheating our congregations. And I've been explaining to people here that you can expect much, much, much longer sermons now, having been duly educated by by Doc. It was a really phenomenal experience, and our congregation is still buzzing from the experience. There were a lot of visitors from the larger community that came. Our musicians outdid themselves, and so Barbara's invited our director of music to direct the music at next year's Moral March. He actually invited him to do that during the middle of the community gathering. He just looked over and said, "You're doing the choir at the Moral March next year."
Awesome.
That's how Barbara invites you into something. It's sort of like the famous Universalist ordination. It's like,
Bible. Yeah.
here's the baton, you're leading, stand up.
Well, and I think that's been part of the, like, Jay, you actually point to another piece that's been a little challenging for some of the clergy, I think, is like going with the flow of that. Because that, you show up and you're, okay, you're praying now. Okay, I'm praying now.
Yeah,
So,
isn't it? It's something so awakening. I interned in a black church, and that was it. You just never knew when you'd be, and it really, all of my little notes and everything that I would always relied on, forget it. You're done. Here's the megaphone, speak. And if the Spirit didn't move and the sermon stayed on the paper, it wasn't a good Sunday. You wanted that takeoff, right? So, really
So
exciting.
he did 2 services here with sermons of that length, and they were not the same sermon. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah. Wow, that's really exciting. And the movement that you describe is so exciting. That time, that sacred time when people look beyond themselves and come together for something bigger. It's heartening. Patrice did text me to say she's now watching us on YouTube and really enjoying this. She got an emergency church call, but she said she wanted to be sure that I said how warmly the All Souls community was welcomed there and how much they loved it, and that, of course, everyone they talked to did not want to register to vote, but they felt good registering the people that they did. So that's fabulous. So are you going to do any more weekends like that, or was this like the big one? I guess it's coming right up, Election Day.
we actually are. We've planned for November 1st. I can let Jay speak to the details about that. But from the beginning, we envisioned that this partnership had to be more than a one-time thing, in part because there's so much criticism by extremists of, there are these outside agitators coming in. And so from the early conversations, we wanted to make sure if we were going to do this partnership, it had depth and breadth. So we'll be gathering on the 1st. Jay?
Yeah, so on that day, a group from Piedmont and a group from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte will meet and be trained to go do voter turnout calls. And what the group that we're working with, Democracy NC, they have identified that there are about 280,000 African American voters in the state of North Carolina that voted in 2008 and in 2012, but did not vote in the midterm election in 2010. So they have that list and are, in part, engaged in a voter turnout effort with that group. Other groups are working their 400,000 Anglo women in that same category, voted in 08 and in 12, didn't in 2010. 2010 is when the tide turned here. I mean, that's when the extremists were voted in. So there's a lot of effort to try to get to folks who have demonstrated an interest in participating and voting, just sat out the midterm election, like many people do, of course. And so on that day, we'll be knocking doors of folks who didn't vote in the midterm last time and say it really matters that you show up. And Democracy NC is incredibly organized. We will be able to offer them on that day a phone number where they can call for a ride to their polling place. So, I mean, it's simply, you indicate you want to participate, we're going to make this as easy as possible for you to do that.
That's great. And Patrice just texted me that All Souls will actually also be doing Get Out the Vote calling. And is it all state level elections that you're concerned with? You're trying to turn the state tide back? Forgive my ignorance. I'm not in Washington anymore. I don't know if any of your U.S. senators are up for elections.
We have the most contentious and right now most expensive Senate race in the country. So Kay Hagan, who is I think to be generous, a moderate Democrat, is being challenged by Tom Tillis, who is the current Speaker of the House and has been one of the architects of this extremist takeover. So it is a very, very nasty race. Evidently, I don't watch network television, but evidently that's all that's on now are ads. But it's a very, very nasty race, and a lot of people are saying the balance in the Senate hangs on the North Carolina election. So that's the big thing that's on our ballots. But yes, there are local issues. There's our state house election, and there's a major bond issue in Mecklenburg County that has to do with our severe underfunding of education. So locally, Mecklenburg County is a strongly Democrat county, where Charlotte is, and so there's a local sales tax referendum. So this is how we're trying to fund education now in North Carolina with our extremist friends who basically are trying to do away with public education. So we will have a sales tax referendum, the proceeds from which will provide for teacher raises. How's that for regressive taxation for a positive cause?
Yeah.
It's a stunning, choose your poison.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be good to do a whole show on the attacks on education, that's for sure. Robin, any last words from you? We're coming to the end of our time here. Anything else you want to say leading into the election? Coming right up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things that I would hope that Unitarian Universalists here across the country with this partnership is how important it is to get out beyond our individual congregations and reach out for this work together. And I know that the coalition has been interfaith across the state of North Carolina, but another piece of it has been that Unitarian Universalist congregations across the state of North Carolina have been together in this struggle. And I think that is unique to our culture and something that we need to see more of if we are to be that viable progressive religion for the 21st century.
Amen to that. Yeah. You all have been working together on the Moral Mondays stuff for a couple of years now, right?
Yep.
Or does it just feel like a couple of years? How long's that been going on? It feels like a while.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years. Jay and I were both some among the clergy who were arrested as part of the Moral Monday movement, and so we have one another on speed dial, to say the least.
Well, it's very inspiring to hear the work that you're doing, and I think all of us have dramatic, contentious elections in our own states. I'm sure Joanna could say a few things about what's going on in Texas, and certainly Al Franken is no friend of the conservatives, my senator here in Minnesota. So yeah, I don't watch TV either, but I hear that that's all that's going on here too, is just attack ads in every direction. So anyway, so bringing a little love into it all. Let's do last words from anybody. And Jay will give you the very final word. Aisha, you got anything to say as we go out today?
Thank you. And the thought that I'll leave with the most is I hope that Unitarian congregations learn from not sticking to their one issue and learning how to be in community so we get the bigger picture stuff done. So thank you.
Jay and Robin, thank you so much for coming on and some great ideas for us to take back in our own states.
Very, very true. Yep. Good job. Good job. Keep up the good fight.
And we will look forward to seeing you in the news by the end of the day, hopefully, marrying people and sending some good energy there. Hopefully that will energize the vote. And meanwhile, we'll see you next time, next week. Let's see, what are we doing next week? I think we're talking about stewardship issues next week. So it's always time for that. And have a great week, everybody. Thanks to Bob LaValle behind that chalice for doing tech support. And thanks to all of you for sharing your time with us.